is 9:44 a.m. The Arabian Sea, 210 nautical miles southeast of Muscat, in open international water that runs 3,800 meters deep and stretches without obstruction in every direction to horizons that are clean, sharp, and completely unambiguous in the brilliant morning light of a cloudless equatorial autumn day. The sun is high enough that the glare on the water is significant from a bridge wing, but irrelevant to every sensor system that matters. The sea state is 2. Swells from the southwest at under a meter. Wind from the northwest at 11 knots. Visibility unlimited. It is, by every meteorological measure, a perfect day to operate a warship. It is also a perfect day for every electro-optical sensor, every thermal imager, and every high-resolution camera aboard any aircraft flying above 3,000 feet to capture imagery of whatever is on the surface with the kind of clarity and detail that makes subsequent denial implausible and subsequent analysis comprehensive. Whatever happens in the Arabian Sea today will be recorded in its entirety. Both sides understand this. One side has planned for it. USS Nimitz, CVN-68, is conducting freedom of navigation and theater security presence operations in the northwestern Arabian Sea, operating under 5th Fleet authority from Bahrain and executing the kind of sustained, visible, legally unimpeachable naval presence that the United States has maintained continuously in this body of water across every administration and every regional crisis for the better part of 4 decades. She is the oldest active carrier in the United States Navy and the most combat experienced, a distinction that, in an institution where organizational memory is carried by systems and doctrine rather than by individual crew members, translates into a weapons inventory, a maintenance posture, and a tactical proficiency level indistinguishable from her newer sisters. Her air wing is embarked, fully operational, and has been flying combat air patrol and maritime surveillance sorties since dawn. Her Combat Information Center is fully manned. Her AN/SPY-1D radar is painting the Arabian Sea in every direction at ranges that cover the southern approaches from the Gulf of Oman with comfortable margin. At 9:44 a.m., USS Nimitz's CIC watch team has been monitoring a contact for the past 3 hours and 17 minutes. The contact first appeared at 6:27 a.m. on a bearing of 328, range 94 nautical miles, identified within 90 seconds of first track by the AN/SLQ 32 Electronic Warfare Systems in Mission Classification, Type 371 Fire Control Radar, consistent with the weapons fit of the IRIN Sahand class destroyer, a vessel type the threat library has maintained a detailed profile on since the Sahand's commissioning in 2018. The contact had been maintaining a parallel course to the carrier at a distance of approximately 85 to 90 nautical miles for the past 3 hours, making no aggressive maneuvers, maintaining no fire control radar emissions above the passive search level, and presenting the tactical picture of a warship conducting overt shadowing, following an American carrier at polite distance, collecting data, asserting presence. Standard ERIN harassment doctrine. Unpleasant but familiar. What changes at 9:44 a.m. is the contact's speed and bearing rate. For 3 hours, it had been maintaining 16 knots on a parallel track. At 9:44 a.m., the bearing to the contact begins shifting north, the visual indication on the tactical display of a vessel, increasing speed and altering course toward the carrier. The range, which had been stable at 87 nautical miles, begins decreasing. The TAO marks the course change and reports to the commanding officer, who has been in the CIC since 6:30 a.m. and whose first words when the TAO delivers the report are not questions. They are a confirmation of a calculation he has already made. What's his speed? Increasing, sir. Computing now. 24 knots. Make that 26. Get me the air wing duty officer. And I want an MH-60R airborne in 10 minutes. The IRIN Sahand. Let us examine this vessel with the same technical honesty that every Iranian military asset in this series has received, because the Sahand represents Iran's most serious attempt to build a modern surface combatant, the most capable warship the Islamic Republic has ever commissioned. And its actual capabilities against an Arleigh Burke-class escort defending a carrier strike group constitute a case study in the gap between national ambition and operational reality that is both instructive and, from a tactical planning perspective, directly relevant to what is about to happen. The Sahand is a domestically designed and constructed destroyer-class vessel, commissioned in December 2018 after a construction history that stretched across more than a decade of sanctions, material shortages, and engineering setbacks. She displaces approximately 2,800 to 3,000 tons, less than half the displacement of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer at full load. She is armed with anti-ship missiles designated as Noor and Qadr by Iranian defense officials, a 76mm main gun derived from the OTO Melara design that Iran possessed before 1979, torpedo tubes, and a surface-to-air missile system of the Merab type. Iranian state media commissioned her with considerable ceremony and described her as the symbol of Iran's indigenous naval capability and the guarantor of Iranian naval power projection. The ceremony was genuine. The symbolism was not without foundation. Building a 3,000-ton warship under comprehensive international sanctions, using largely domestic engineering and manufacturing capacity, is a genuine industrial achievement. What the ceremony and the state media coverage did not address is the operational reality of a 3,000-ton warship with a 1970s-derived weapons system, a fire control architecture that Iranian defense officials have been deliberately vague about, and a propulsion plant whose sea trial performance figures Iranian state media never published, facing an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer and an embarked carrier air wing in the open Arabian Sea on a day with unlimited visibility and a fully operational E-2D Hawkeye in the airspace overhead. In this specific operational context, the Sahand's displacement, weapons fit, and sensor suite are not competitive with the force she is now accelerating toward. The commanding officer of USS Nimitz knows this. The commanding officer of USS Nimitz's escort, USS Princeton, CG-59, which is 16 nautical miles ahead of the carrier on the threat bearing, knows this. What remains to be determined is whether the IRIN's commanding officer has made the same calculation. The MH-60R Seahawk from Nimitz's air wing launched at 9:54 a.m. and turned northwest at 140 knots toward the Sahand's bearing. At 9:54 a.m., the contact was at 71 nautical miles from the carrier and still closing. The speed estimate had stabilized at 28 knots, an aggressive approach rate for a vessel with a hull form and propulsion plant of the Sahand's class. At 28 knots, 71 nautical miles, represented 2 hours and 32 minutes to the carrier's current position. Enough time for a deliberate, methodical defensive response with no urgency and no improvisation. The Seahawk would reach visual range of the Sahand in approximately 28 minutes. At 10:01 a.m., the Sahand transmitted on Channel 16. The transmission was in Farsi, and the ship's Farsi-qualified petty officer translated it for the commanding officer. The American carrier and its escorts were operating in proximity to IRIN vessels conducting lawful naval exercises in the Arabian Sea and were directed to alter course to maintain a minimum separation of 50 nautical miles. Failure to comply would be viewed as an act of hostile intent under Iranian maritime law. The transmission was scripted. It was also, from a legal standpoint, entirely without foundation. These were international waters where no provision of Iranian domestic law applied to American naval vessels, and the directive to maintain a 50 nautical mile exclusion zone around IRIN vessels conducting exercises had no basis in UNCLOS or any other recognized instrument of international maritime law. USS Princeton responded on Channel 16 in English and Farsi within 40 seconds. The American vessels were operating in international waters of the Arabian Sea in full compliance with international law. They did not recognize any claim of jurisdiction over these waters. The IRIN vessel was directed to maintain a safe and professional distance in accordance with CUES protocols, and any unsafe or unprofessional maneuver would be responded to in accordance with standing rules of engagement for self-defense. The response was delivered in the tone of an officer reading from a prepared text, because it was. Princeton's commanding officer had delivered this response, or a version of it, to IRIN vessels attempting harassment operations in the Arabian Sea on 2 previous deployments. At 10:03 a.m., USS Princeton increased speed to 28 knots and altered course to interpose herself between the Sahand's approach bearing and USS Nimitz's position. The interposition maneuver placed the cruiser 14 nautical miles directly between the Sahand and the carrier on the Sahand's approach axis. From the IRIN destroyer's bridge, the tactical picture was now explicit. An American Ticonderoga-class cruiser, 9,600 tons full load, 122 VLS cells, AN/SPY, 1B radar, armed with SM-2 Block 3A missiles, Harpoon anti-ship missiles, a 5-inch gun, Phalanx CIWS, and torpedoes, had placed itself between the Sahand and the carrier. The Sahand would need to either pass through Princeton's position or go around her to continue the approach. Neither option was unchallenged. The MH-60R Seahawk reached visual range of the Sahand at 10:22 a.m. The FLIR sensor resolved the Iranian destroyer clearly at 14 nautical miles. A gray-hulled vessel, approximately 120 meters in length, with the distinctive profile of the Sahand class. The helicopter observed the Sahand's bridge wing, the missile launcher positions on the foredeck and amidships, and the ship's wake, the prop wash pattern consistent with 27 to 28 knots of speed, confirming the radar track's velocity estimate. Most significantly, the Seahawk's electronic support measures detected the Sahand's fire control radar, the Type 371, shifting from search mode to a higher pulse rate consistent with tracking mode. Not weapons employment mode. Tracking mode. The Sahand was building a fire control solution on the American formation. The Seahawk's crew reported the fire control radar activation to USS Nimitz's CIC at 10:24 a.m. The commanding officer received the report. He looked at the range. The Sahand was now 58 nautical miles from the carrier, still closing at 27 knots. He looked at the EW report. He made a decision. USS Nimitz launched two F/A-18F Super Hornets from the flight deck at 10:27 a.m. They were not launched for air superiority. They were launched in the surface warfare role, each configured with an AGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missile and an AN/ASQ-228A TFLIR targeting pod, and tasked with establishing an armed overwatch position between the Sahand and the carrier. The launch was deliberate and visible. A carrier launching armed strike aircraft in a surface warfare configuration in the direction of an approaching warship is an unambiguous communication in the language of naval confrontation. It says, "We have seen your fire control radar activation. We have evaluated your approach, and we are now deploying weapons capable of addressing that approach from a platform that outranges everything in your weapons inventory." The F/A-18Fs climbed to 22,000 feet and established an orbit at 40 nautical miles from the Sahand's last reported position. At 22,000 feet, with ATFLIR pods active, they had a direct electro-optical view of the Sahand's entire upper structure. The bridge, the weapon systems, the radar arrays. The imagery was being transmitted in real time to the CIC aboard Nimitz. The Sahand's crew could see the FA-18Fs on their own radar. They knew what the aircraft were. They knew the Harpoon anti-ship missiles range. They could calculate the engagement geometry without assistance. At 10:31 a.m., the Sahand's Type 371 fire control radar shifted back to search mode. The tracking mode emission ceased. The AN/SLQ-32 aboard Nimitz registered the mode change within 4 seconds and reported it to the CIC. The fire control solution that the Sahand had been building was no longer being actively maintained. The commanding officer noted the report. He said nothing. He watched the tactical display. At 10:34 a.m., the Sahand reduced speed from 27 knots to 22, then to 18. The approach rate was decreasing. The CPA calculation updated from a projected closest point of approach of 24 nautical miles, close enough for the Sahand's NOR missiles to be within theoretical engagement range of the carrier, to a projected CPA of 34 nautical miles. Then 39. The Sahand was not altering course dramatically. It was bleeding speed while gradually curving its track northward. The classic face-saving maneuver that allows a commanding officer to moderate an approach without executing the obvious, filmable, documentable reversal that communicates retreat to anyone watching. The Seahawk maintained its forward position between the Sahand and Princeton, recording every aspect of the Iranian vessel's behavior change. The FLIR captured the moment the Sahand's bow wave diminished as the ship decelerated, a change visible in thermal imaging as the warmer water churned by the propellers at high speed settled into a lower energy wake pattern. The sensor operator marked the timestamp. The CIC logged it. The intelligence officer would later correlate the deceleration timing with the F/A-18F launch event and the fire control radar deactivation event to build a precise behavioral response profile for the Sahand's commanding officer. At 10:44 a.m., 20 minutes after the FA-18Fs established their overwatch orbit, and 13 minutes after the Sahand's fire control radar returned to search mode, the Iranian destroyer altered course 22 degrees to the northwest. Not due west, not a sharp reversal, but a gradual curve away from the carrier's track that, projected forward, would take the Sahand's closest approach to Nimitz from 39 nautical miles to 54 nautical miles. The threat was dissolving. Not dramatically. Not in the way that makes good footage for either side. Quietly, incrementally, in the way that gray zone maritime confrontations most often resolve, when one side has more sensors, more weapons, more reach, and more patience than the other. The two FA-18Fs maintained their overwatch orbit until 11:03 a.m., when the Sahand's course and speed had stabilized on a northwesterly heading that placed it on a clearly diverging track from USS Nimitz. They recovered aboard at 11:19 a.m. and 11:21 a.m., respectively. The Seahawk maintained forward coverage until 11:31 a.m., its FLIR recording the Sahand's continuing withdrawal before returning to the ship. By noon, the Sahand was 71 nautical miles northwest of the carrier and increasing range. The shadowing operation that had begun at 6:27 a.m. had ended with the Iranian destroyer 71 miles away and moving further. The after-action intelligence package was comprehensive. The Sahand's complete emission profile during an aggressive approach evolution, the Type 371 radar at search, track, and return to search modes, time-stamped against the specific American actions that had preceded each mode change. The Sahand's speed profile during the approach and withdrawal correlated with the visual events the Seahawk had recorded. The exact temporal sequence: fire control radar activation at 10:22 a.m., F/A-18F launch at 10:27 a.m., fire control radar deactivation at 10:31 a.m., speed reduction at 10:34 a.m., course alteration at 10:44 a.m. These timestamps told a precise story about how an IRIN commanding officer evaluated the escalating American response and made sequential decisions to moderate his posture as each American capability demonstration made his tactical situation clearer. The data would be used, not just filed. Used, incorporated into the behavioral models that Fifth Fleet Intelligence maintains for IRIN commanders, used to refine the timing and sequencing of American response measures in future confrontations, used to train the next generation of CIC watch teams in the specific sequence of actions that produces Iranian behavioral modification without escalation. This is how professional navies learn, not from exercises alone, but from the detailed record of real encounters with real adversaries in real water. The IRIN Sahand is Iran's proudest surface combatant, the vessel that the Islamic Republic spent more than a decade building, the ship that Iranian admirals point to as evidence that decades of sanctions could not prevent Iran from developing indigenous naval power. They are not entirely wrong about what the Sahand represents as an industrial achievement. Completing a 3,000-ton warship under the conditions Iran has operated under since 1979 is not a trivial accomplishment, and the engineers who built the Sahand deserve credit for what they achieved in the context of those constraints. What the Sahand cannot do, what no 3,000-ton warship with a 1970s derived weapons system can do, is sustain an aggressive approach against a carrier strike group that has interposed a 9,600-ton cruiser with 122 VLS cells, deployed an armed MH-60R Seahawk in forward overwatch and launched 2 F/A-18Fs in surface warfare configuration with Harpoon missiles aboard. The arithmetic of that equation does not change based on the Sahand's commissioning ceremony or the enthusiasm of Iranian state media coverage. The Sahand's fire control radar activated for 9 minutes. The F/A-18Fs were in the air for 5 minutes before it deactivated. The Sahand's speed declined 13 minutes later. The course curved away 10 minutes after that. The entire sequence was recorded in detail by sensors that will inform American tactical planning long after the specific incident has faded from anyone's immediate memory. USS Nimitz completed her scheduled operations that day without any alteration to her planned flight schedule or her transit track. The F/A-18Fs that recovered at 11:19 a.m. and 11:21 a.m. were refueled, rearmed, and spotted for the afternoon launch cycle by 2:30 p.m. The carrier's cook prepared a meal that drew compliments in the crew's mess. The Arabian Sea was quiet. Iran's most capable warship had approached to within 58 nautical miles of an American carrier, activated its fire control radar, evaluated the American response, and decided the arithmetic did not favor continuing. The arithmetic has never favored continuing. It will not favor continuing the next time either. The United States Navy has been doing this arithmetic in the Arabian Sea for longer than the IRIN has had ships capable of attempting these confrontations, and the result has been the same every time. Bye for now.